Hey guys, how's it going? I am here for what I'm going to call a Neo-ShakeTube video, because obviously ShakeTube is over, but I am doing this video ShakeTube style, and so the play I am looking at today is Measure for Measure. So I read this all in one day over the weekend, and I had heard a lot about this play before reading it, because our old friend, Harold Bloom, loves it, and he mentioned it several times before he actually gets to his chapter on Measure for Measure. And his passion for Measure for Measure really comes out in his chapter on it. I really liked his chapter on it. And so anyway, this play takes place in Vienna, in a sort of fictionalized Vienna. And we start off with the Duke of Vienna, who, he gives no reason for it, but he decides that he wants to kind of take a vacation from being Duke, and says that he's going to go off somewhere. He doesn't tell anyone where he's going, but he decides to bequeath his powers to his friend Angelo. So Angelo becomes sort of the acting Duke of Vienna, and what the Duke does is he, in secret, goes off and disguises himself as a friar, and sort of pops up throughout the play in different scenes. So Angelo, with his new powers, decides to impose very strict morality laws, especially surrounding sexuality. Anyone who has premarital sex, anyone who gets pregnant out of wedlock, etc., is put to death under his rule, or at least that's supposed to be the rule. And there's not one overarching narrative in this play. There's a lot of different mini stories within it, but the main thread connecting the whole thing and the kind of climax is the story of Claudio and his sister Isabella. So Claudio has gotten his girlfriend Juliet pregnant out of wedlock, and so he's taken off to prison, or off to jail, because that is now against the law, strictly against the law. And so Isabella, who is an aspiring nun, decides, I need to help my brother. So she goes to Angelo and asks him, and tries to get him to set Claudio free. And so that's the main running narrative, and the Duke kind of pops up as the friar every now and then and kind of gives his little commentaries on things. But what I found most fascinating about this play was how it explored how these supposedly civilized laws so often conflict with what will make people happy and what people really want to do. So, Isabella is an aspiring nun, like I said, and when we first meet her in this play, she's in the nunnery, and she's talking to a nun, and the nun is telling her about all the rules that are in the nunnery, and Isabella is like, well, they should be stricter, which is kind of shocking, because at one point they describe what the regulations for how nuns can speak with men, and it's like a nun can only speak with a man if she has her veil on, and if the abbess of the convent is next to her, and if she takes her veil off, then she's not allowed to talk to the man, even with the abbess there. So there are all these rules, and Isabella wants them to be stricter. And she even says at one point that she approves of all of the morality laws that Angelo has imposed, and yet, because she loves her brother, she ends up trying to sort of go against these laws and get Angelo to free Claudio, despite the fact that he broke the law. And then you have Angelo, who, when Isabella comes to him, he naturally, for a Shakespeare play, falls in love at first sight with her. And so what he decides is that he will free Claudio if she will sleep with him. So, obviously, instantly, he is made out into a hypocrite, and Isabella kind of turns the tables on him and says, or tries to turn the tables on him, and says, well, I'm not going to do that. Obviously, she's not going to do it, but then she says, well, if you don't free Claudio, then I'm going to tell everyone that you're a hypocrite. You can tell everyone that you made sexual advances on me, and then he says, oh, well, you're just a woman, and I'm, the de facto Duke, so no one's going to believe you. And I know it's anachronistic, but I could not help but see all of the modern-day women reporting on men who have sexually assaulted them in this situation here. And I thought it was so cool that Shakespeare had this in his play all these centuries ago. I mean, even if it is me imposing a modern perspective on an older play, I do feel like you can interpret in this way of this exploration of how men tend to kind of assume that women are interested in them when they really aren't, because it is kind of implied that the way Isabella talks to Angelo is part of the reason he thinks she might be interested in him, because she uses this very flowery language towards him, and he at least says that that's what made him think she was interested in him, although I would also argue that you could say that he's just, a male who doesn't have much consideration for a woman's right to choose over her own sexuality. So yeah, I thought that this was fascinating, and you kind of have three major case studies in this idea of how laws can conflict with what people's feelings. You have Claudio, who obviously loves his girlfriend, and you have Isabella, who likes these laws but can't abide by them because they're going to lead to her brother's death, and she loves her brother. And you have Angelo, who is just a hypocrite, who pretends to follow these laws but clearly doesn't have much regard for them. So yeah, and those are the two big themes I picked up on that made me really love this play. And what I also love about this play, I mentioned how there's not any one huge overarching narrative. There's a lot of different stories. And because of that, there are also a lot of fleshed out characters. Harold Bloom says in his chapter that there's not really any main character in this play. They're all, you could ostensibly write papers about every single character, so to speak, or make a video about every single character. And I really loved that. I really loved, I wasn't able to focus on every character as much as I focused on Isabella and Claudio. But I'll reread this play and focus on the other characters. And there's even one character who only shows up for one scene. This guy named Bernardine, who's being sentenced to death for, I'm not sure what, I don't know if it's specified what he's being executed for, but he only shows up for one scene, and Harold Bloom talks about him for like 3 or 4 pages. And it's a short scene. I mean, it's not, he doesn't even have much dialogue. So I really like that. And this play, Harold Bloom, again, says that is the most nihilistic of Shakespeare's plays. And I don't know if I quite agree with that. I think Hamlet is pretty nihilistic. But there is a speech that the Duke says to Claudio when the Duke, as the friar, at one point visits Claudio in prison and speaks with him a little bit, and he gives them this sort of huge spiel about death and life. And I'll just give you a few snippets from it. Merely thou art death's fool, for him thou labourest by thy flight to shun, and yet run'st toward him still. A little bit lower. Thou art not thyself, for thou exists on many 1,000 grains that issue out of dust. Happy thou art not, for what thou hast not, still thou strivest to get, and what thou hast, forgetst. So, that's just a couple snippets from it, but that is one of the most nihilistic things you could possibly get in a work of literature from before 1900, I think, or before 1800 maybe. And that is actually my new favorite speech from Shakespeare. And with all this said, this might actually be my new favorite Shakespeare play. I'm not sure yet, but it definitely has joined my my personal pantheon of Shakespeare plays. It is now, for me, up there with Hamlet and King Lear and Macbeth, and Much Ado About Nothing. So, yeah, anyway, I definitely recommend this play, and thanks for watching. Bye, guys.